What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Dancers or Athletes Do podcast, where we discuss the athletic aspects of dancing. I'm your host, Slim B. So, in this episode, we have as guest Erin Sanchez. Erin, how are you doing?
I'm awesome. How are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to have you on the show for this episode. For the people who haven't heard about you or want to know more, can you quickly introduce yourself to the listeners?
Absolutely. So, my name is Erin Sanchez. I currently live and work in the UK in the Midlands. My life and career has spanned both sort of academic and dance practice. When I was younger, I was living in the United States. I was born and raised in New Mexico, and I studied ballet and flamenco and contemporary dance. And when I went into university, I studied dance and sociology. But during that time, I also went and studied in New York and studied contemporary dance there. Um, I was at a point in my life where I needed to make a transition, and I decided that I wanted to look into perhaps medicine. But
Mm-hmm.
with the idea that medicine was going to take about 10 years to finish a degree, I decided I wanted to try a master's degree in science first and just see how it fit. So I moved to the UK and did a dance science degree at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance. And that was just sort of an open door for me to be able to explore things that I'd always wondered about with dance. And so I've been doing dance science related things in my career for about the last 10 years. I now work for a charity that supports dancers in the UK, and that's called One Dance UK. And I also manage a sister organization called the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science.
Okay, that's already a lot of experience that you've built over the years, looking at where you've come and what you've done so far. So, at One Dance UK, specifically, what do you do there? What can people see as your daily life?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this in perhaps a slightly different way, which is that I'm a very growth mindset kind of woman. I really like
Mm-hmm.
to find things out. I'm really curious. And so when I started at One Dance UK, I was an intern. I came in one day and one of my friends had been doing the internship, but she got another job and she said, well, why don't you go and do this internship? It would be fun. This is my friend who's called Dr. Sarah Needham Beck, and she's now the most incredible dance physiologist. So I got this opportunity on the back of her giving it to me. I showed up one day. I said, I'd really love to do this. I want to do an internship. And they said, great. Well, why don't you come one day a week and we'll see how it goes. So at that point, I had finished my master's degree. I didn't really have a lot to do in the UK. I had a sort of a job in a restaurant, but I wasn't super passionate about that.
Yeah.
So I showed up first day, had a great time, met my incredible mentor, Helen Laws. And the next day, I woke up and I didn't have anything to do. And I thought, well, I wonder if I should just go over and see if I can do something else. So I did. And I showed up the next day and the following day and the day after that. And I just kind of made a space for myself there. Since that internship, I have kind of pursued opportunities to do other things within the organization. So I was an intern, and then I was a paid sort of part-time administrator, and then I
Mm-hmm.
found an opportunity to try and apply for a job that was available, and I got that job. So it was a kind of a growth thing. And what that's allowed me to do is really understand the work of the organization very deeply. So it's an advocacy organization and a charity. So we support the entire dance sector, which includes children and young people who do dance classes on an evening, and
Mm-hmm.
older adults, so your grandmother who goes to a tea dance on a Sunday afternoon, professional dancers of all different genres, so ballet, contemporary, hip hop, ballroom, Latin, the whole span. And I really understand more about that community of people as a result of doing lots of different jobs. But I think I also understand a lot about health and well being, which is my current role. So my current role encapsulates education, research, and healthcare services for dancers within the UK. And all of that, as much as possible, works in a triangle. So all of the research that we do feeds into the education programs. All the research that we do provides an evidence base for our healthcare services. And everything that we do, as much as possible, is free to the dancers who are in our sort of catchment, which is in the UK.
Yeah. Cool. And why did you wanted to be in the well-being part of that? That's something that you mentioned. I mean, a lot of a lot of attention goes to teaching choreographies, more the visual parts of dancing. So why did you opt to go down that road?
Yeah. When I was training as a dancer, I had a lot of really wonderful experiences with teachers, with choreographers, with staff, kind of the person who was on the door at the studio, whatever. And there were experiences that were really wonderful, and there were experiences that weren't so wonderful. And
Hmm.
as a young dancer, I always wondered why they were different and what was different about those experiences. In some places, I just thrived. I grew in my technique, I became fitter, I became healthier, my dance practice got better. And I started to realize that it was not necessarily about the steps that I was doing or the movement practice that I was doing, but more about the psychological environment that was created in those spaces. And I became very passionate in understanding how people did that well because I recognized that it wasn't just me that was seeing the benefits, it was all the other dancers around me and everyone in that space. So I wanted to learn more about how I could do that myself in my own practice to kind of create spaces that I could thrive in. But
Hmm.
also, I wanted to kind of learn how I could teach that to others. So that was my kind of seed. My father is also a psychologist. And so I think he raised us questioning um, maybe how we thought about ourselves. And
Hmm.
in my experience of dance training, dance is very evaluative and can be very subjective as well. So those
Hmm.
evaluations are in the eye of the beholder, whether that's your teacher, choreographer, the audience. And so sometimes it's hard to know how to be better. And so if you can work out where you are and what you want, your own motivation, if you kind of put it in those terms, in those psychological terms, you can actually you can make the situation more effective for yourself. You can
Hmm.
achieve your goals without having to worry about pleasing others. And so that was kind of, I suppose, a dual way of wanting to get into well-being. And I think just one other thing to say about well-being is that I really truly believe that you need to spend your life doing something that you're passionate about. Because I think if you spend your life doing something that pays well, or you spend your life doing something because someone tells you you should, or you spend your life doing something because you're afraid you don't have the skills to do what you really want to do,
Hmm.
I think you lose out moment by moment, day by day. And I think you need to be honest with yourself. And I really care about this thing. I care about everything that I do every day. And I know a lot of people can't say that. And I encourage everyone that I teach or provide support to really seek their own passions and their own goals. And so this is something that I'm super passionate about, so it just really fits for me.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and that you're passionate about it also shows because you wrote a book about it, called Performance Psychology for Dancers. Maybe first, what is performance psychology? What can we understand under that term?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I should say just before we kind of talk any more about the book is that I wrote this book in association with two incredible colleagues. So, Professor Dave Collins and
Hmm.
Dr. Anya McNamara. And between the two of them, they are these incredible pillars of knowledge. And I was lucky enough to kind of work alongside them and learn from them. So it was a group effort to write that book, and I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to do it with them. But to answer your question, performance psychology is an area of psychology which is about human endeavor and allowing humans to reach their goals or their performances as well as they can. And performance psychology can be applied to many different areas of endeavor. So it could be sport, it could be business, it could be dance, it could be loads of different things. But the tenets are more or less the same no matter what you're applying it to, which is that
Hmm.
you're looking at the individual in front of you, you're looking at the context in which they're going to perform, and you're trying to help that individual to engage with that context and to use their skills or develop new skills, which will allow them to perform in the way that they want to. So it's a very
Yeah.
individualized structure.
Hmm. And then you chose to write a book specifically for dancers. why was that needed? Because you could say like performance psychology, you can apply it for different things. So you could, there are probably maybe performance psychology books that are branded as generic or for your life in general, for your business in general. So if dance is your business, you could apply it as well. So why would you need a specific one targeted at dancers and educators, coaches, and teachers?
Absolutely. So I mentioned about the context, and the context of dance for anyone that's ever done it, no matter what kind of dance you've done, you understand that there's a culture in dance and that there are certain essentially social rules within the context of learning dance or providing dance as an activity or participating in dance as a career.
Mm-hmm,
So those context differences are not fully understood. And so if a performance psychologist who came from football and had been working in football for their whole lives came and worked with dancers, you can kind of imagine that they would be shocked by some of the things that dancers do. I was listening to one of your past podcasts, and it was from the University of Minnesota dance team.
mm-hmm,
And they were talking about the fact that they're not NCAA regulated and that they can thus train all the time. And that's one of the things that's really unique about our context in dance is that we practice all the time. We also don't have an off season. We don't have sort of peak performances the way that most athletes would. We
mm-hmm,
have to be on our game, fully fit, completely at our peak every single day, all the way through the year. And that's very challenging. And so the reason that I wanted to produce the book was to help those people who were maybe experiencing that for the first time, whether that's a parent of a
mm-hmm,
young dancer or a young person who's starting out dancing, to understand that context, but also to help people who have been in it and kind of been bred into it and have done it for their whole lives to understand that that context is extremely unique and there are things that we can do through performance psychology to prepare us to thrive and to experience success in those environments. But there are also things that we can recognize that we don't have control over. We don't have
mm-hmm,
control over potential risk of injury. We don't have control over the way that talent is identified. And that's a really important piece. So we can only recognize what those structures are and we can work around them and move around them. Because I think sometimes if you get caught up in trying to change that system or you try to kind of run yourself into something that you can't change, that can be really demotivating and
mm-hmm.
negative mental health experience.
Yeah, indeed. And you mentioned already before, like business and sports, it's where performance psychology is applied. So when researching for the book or through experience, have you seen differences between other athletes and dancers? As you say, you already mentioned like they have an off season while dancers don't really have an off season, so that's already different. Are there other aspects that you see are different between other athletes and dancers in this aspect?
For sure. So I think there are some things that you could argue sort of sit in the middle. If you could imagine the athlete and the dancer, there are commonalities. But the
Hmm.
key differences, I would argue, between most athletes and most dancers is that there is that subjective nature to the evaluation. So if you're a gymnast, if you're a diver, if you're another aesthetic athlete, you would have a clear criteria for how a judge is going to mark you. In
Hmm.
dance, we don't often have criteria. Even when you think about breaking battles, there's no written criteria that says this is what you're going to be marked on. So it's very subjective. The other thing about dance is that it's highly creative. And with that creativity, there comes a use of emotion, which is very unique in dance that we don't see in sport. So, in sport, emotion might be a way to gen yourself up or get excited. Emotion might be the outcome of performance. If you
Hmm.
win, you feel excited. If you lose, you feel sad. In dance, emotion can be the performance. So, emotion can be the reason that someone comes to see you perform. Emotion can be the point of the performance, but it can
Hmm.
also be the sort of the beginning place of performance. So, if you're creating
Yeah.
something or choreographing, you might start from an emotion and go, move to this emotion, or the emotions that you feel to this music, I want you to express them. So, that's very unique about dance as well. The final thing that I'd say is most unique about dance is also the relationship between the dancer and their sense of maybe body image or sense of self. So there's something called contingent self worth. And what that is essentially when an individual feels as good as someone else thinks they are. So if a teacher thinks you're talented or capable, you feel
Hmm.
talented and capable. If the teacher thinks you're no good, you feel no good. That's called contingent self worth. And one of the things that we learn through experiences in dance training is what our teachers or what choreographers or what we think the audience is looking for, whether that's a body shape or a certain way of performing or maybe a kind of an aesthetic feature of our activity, whether that's fast movement or powerful movement. Um, and if we don't think that we're meeting those things, we can feel really badly about ourselves. And that's really difficult to unpick if there's no
Hmm.
clear guidance for what it looks like. And many dancers are very perfectionistic. They want to reach those goals and do them really, really well. But if you don't know what the goal is and no one's written it down or said this is the goal, you can feel really badly about yourself because you don't know if you're meeting it. Even if you're doing everything and you're really, really good, you
Hmm.
can feel really badly about yourself. So that sense of self-worth is really important and maybe a difficult thing for people who are coming from other areas of performance psychology to understand.
Yeah, indeed, especially the thing that you mentioned, like the criteria, especially when doing when dealing with judges or judging at a competition, for example. That's something that I also noticed when I do competitions. Like with most sports, it's either you score a point or you don't, you make a goal or you don't, and whether it's pretty or not doesn't really matter. The point is made. Whether you're emotionally angry or happy when you do that, if it works, it works. While with us, sometimes it's a little bit vaguer, especially when you have dancers that are have all the foundation, all the technique, and where they at a certain point have to judge, like, okay, I felt this performance more, which is, if you're on the receiving side of that feedback, it's like, yeah, I cannot really do a lot with the fact that you found or felt that performance more than mine, which makes it, especially when you go back to your training and say, okay, I want to improve, but what exactly would I need to work on? Or should I just say, okay, we didn't win this competition because this judge felt so about it, but it's not like a lot we can do about it, because it might be in that moment that that person felt like this about that performance. And then I can imagine you will have to, or I know that you would have to let it go at some point, because also next time it's another judge, another place, other music, other event, other venue. So you might do the same thing and people or everybody might like it or nobody at all,
Exactly.
depending on a lot of, yeah, a lot of things that are completely out of your control.
Yeah, and what you just said there about your own experience with competition, it really shows how we learn these really key psychological skills that help us to proceed in really good performance.
Hmm.
So you have experienced this thing of somebody saying to you, "Oh, well, I felt that person's performance more than yours." Okay, you also realize that that's not very helpful for your training. You've also realized that when you go to the next competition, there's going to be somebody else who has a different opinion. So, when we think about how dancers become excellent, one of the things that we have to think about is the development of a skill, of firstly, a recognition that people have different opinions and that those opinions don't help us to train. And so you already know that. You already have that psychological skill to recognize that that's just an opinion. But then what you do with that, and what you clearly are doing with that, is going, okay, what I'm training for isn't to please someone else. What I'm training for is to be the best dancer I can be. So I can set those things aside and go, those things are not in my control. What's in my control is my training and my preparation. So that is what we would usually call realistic performance evaluation. And
Hmm.
to be able to kind of know, okay, where am I at right now? What am I doing that's going to help me to perform well? So that's such a perfect example of you kind of being able to implement that psychological skill.
Yeah, I mean, That's also something that you discuss in the book, like these different aspects of going through. But just to finish my thought, there are also judges who really give valuable feedback, who said like, okay, this is great, but this needs work, and that gives you a clear um thing to work on. I have people who said, okay, like this was nice, but this person did this better than you, which gave them the advantage at the end. But this gives you then something clear to work on. So it's not that all judges maybe try to get away with say, okay, I felt it more. Some really try to like dig deeper and say, okay, these are the things that I look at. Some people really have a clear list of things that they look at and make that known to you in the sense of, okay, this was good, this was less good. So that gives
Mhm.
you something to work on once you get back home. To move on to another thing you already mentioned in earlier, that you say some people dance um, because of enjoyment. Some people want to have a professional career out of it, and that already leads to something that it's not a one size fits all approach. And that's also something that's highlighted in the beginning of the book. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that more, how that comes to be, and how you kind of decided for yourself where you are in the different in the spectrum of dancing?
Yeah. So in the book, we talk about the need to understand why you're doing whatever the activity is, whether it's dance or sport or, pursuing an academic qualification. And one of the things that we talk about is whether or not you're participating for the joy of participation, whether
Hmm.
you are doing something out of a desire to be excellent, or whether you're doing something out of a desire to be essentially kind of developing skills. And that's not necessarily towards the end of being excellent, but just as an opportunity to develop skills and to learn. And identifying why you do something is fundamentally important because
Hmm.
I think, especially in dance, you will be in a room of people who are learning to dance with you, or you might be training on your own with a coach or a guru, in fact. And what you are doing there is going to be different than what someone else, maybe the person next to you, is doing, or maybe another person who's a student of that coach. You have to understand what your goals are. And by understanding those goals, if, for example, your goal is to be competitively the best, to win that battle, to win that competition, to have that place in the best company in the world, then you need to prepare differently. You need to put
Hmm.
different things into your preparation. You need to do different things to be able to essentially meet your goals. If your job or if your interest is participation, then you will focus on different things, you will do different
Hmm.
things. But like you said, it's not one size fits all. And one of my favorite things that Professor Collins always talks about is that it depends. And actually, the recognition that you may start out in one goal area and thinking of
Hmm.
one certain kind of goal. It doesn't mean that you're going to stay in that goal for your whole life or even for the next year. You might change. And there's lots about what's around us that changes us. So the context of the pandemic changed a lot of people's desires to do certain things. And that
Hmm.
can be really disconcerting and can cause you to feel a bit confused because your motivation has changed. But actually, if you kind of keep a temperature check on that and go, okay, do I really care about this as a performance goal or as a competitive goal? Do I really think about this as something that I do for fun? And depending on where you're at, you can change how you're approaching it or what you're doing with it. But staying aware of that, especially as you progress through changes in your life. So there are big,
Hmm.
big changes as you become an adult. There are big, big changes even through your child life. So you might kind of turn 16, you're not quite an adult yet, and suddenly you feel really, really differently about the participation or activities that you're doing.
Hmm.
So keeping in touch with that is really important.
Yeah, and you said that a lot changes. For example, also in childhood, something that's also mentioned in the book, that people might show early talent in the beginning. In the book, it was called Early Promises, and that everything goes super great the first years. Every performance is great, every class is great. They get acknowledgments by teachers and people who are in the audience. But then later on, they have they have problems, or when a problem occurs or when issues occurs, they have a problem dealing with it. Can you explain how that happens, why it happens, to those people who are um, like considered exceptional talents, maybe when they initially start dancing?
Yeah. So I want you to just think for yourself of two people who are studying dance. And those two people, they are both extremely talented. They're both at the same level in terms of their capabilities. When you see them both, although they're very young, you can see that they're both incredibly capable and they are definitely going to be the best.
Hmm.
Now, as you watch them grow, you might see that one of the young people experiences an injury early on, and that keeps them out of training for a very long time, a year. And the other young person during that year, they are going and experiencing new things, getting better, getting stronger, getting fitter, getting more capable as a dancer. Then, as time goes on, they're continuing to train. Then the same young dancer who had an injury also has a bereavement in their family. Their parent passes away, and they take a break from dance. Now, if you think about that and you think about what you might expect from those two young people, you might expect at the end of a training experience that the young person who had the injury, had the bereavement in their lives, that they would be less likely to reach a performance level that would be similar to that other dancer who didn't have any of those setbacks. But
Hmm.
actually, what we learn through setback is we learn how to manage ourselves. We learn from those setbacks. We learn different things about ourselves. And this is something called post traumatic growth. And there's a lot of research on post traumatic growth. But one of the things that we know is that through support from other people, through intrinsic motivations, things that are kind of talking about doing things for love or for passion, we can see that people who have these experiences can grow following challenge. One of the main areas of research that Professor Collins and Dr. McNamara do is about what they call the rocky road to success. And
Hmm.
what they've proven through research with athletes is that the more small challenges that people have, and sometimes even large challenges that people have during childhood, during that key talent development time, the more likely they are to be highly excellent in terms of their performance. Not just sort of, okay, you've made it to professional performance, but you are one of the best, most sustained professional performers that there are. And they posit that the reason for that is that through those bumps in the road, young people are learning psychological skills. So just like
Hmm.
you learned how to cope with the differential feedback that you might get from judges, these people learn to cope as they experience things. And what they've found is actually that people who have a smooth road to the top and they don't experience any challenges, when they first experience a big challenge, they're on a very big stage. So the Olympics
Hmm.
is going on right now. You might think of an Olympian who, all through their talent development process, hasn't had any setbacks. They've never had an injury. They've never lost a competition. When they get to the Olympics for the first time, and they fall down or they have a bad performance, they don't have all that learning from having fallen down or had a bad performance previously. So that process is really important.
Yeah. And that also leads a little bit into my next question, is that it also shows in the book, or is expressed in the book, that it's good to allow dancers to make mistakes, especially when looking at parents who have children who are dancing, that they would do the extra effort to avoid their children to be exposed to a negative experience, all with the best intentions, but that it actually might negatively impact them in the end. Is
Mm.
that then related as well to the fact that they're not like psychology prepared to deal with issues and things like that in the
Yeah,
future?
it's absolutely connected. And I think a lot of parents want the best for their young person and want to kind of then, in the United States, they call them snowplow parents. They just want to plow
Hmm.
everything out of the way. And that's understandable. You want your child to have the best experience, but actually, the best experience is for them to learn how to experience real life and realities in terms of their performance. So, Dave and Anya are both parents. I'm a parent as well, and when we think about being a parent, you want everything to go right. But
Hmm.
actually, Dave talks a little bit later on in the book about going from being essentially a kind of a coach to being a manager. And when young people are young and learning, you coach them, you support them, you help them to interpret and understand when they have fallen down or when they have made a mistake, how they can pick themselves back up. That's your job. But as they get older and as they become a little bit more able to manage things and able to pick themselves back up, you step back a little bit and you become a manager for them. You help them reflect on what they're experiencing and you're less kind of um, directly in it with them. So, yeah, I think that's
Hmm.
really important for parents to understand.
Yeah. A lot of dancers specialize in a specific dance style. They might also do others, but most dancers also have this one style that they're specialized in. What is actually the problem, or why is it not so good to necessarily specialize super early in your dance career? Let's say I will do jazz and I will only do jazz from the beginning. Um, I mean, it's expressed in the book that this has some negative aspects or consequences as well. Can you elaborate on that too?
Yeah. So when we think about early specialization, this is something that's really debated currently in dance because there are certain genre of dance which are very focused on starting really very early.
Hmm.
But what we know from sport is that for appropriate motor development, so the physiological development, we need to ensure that as much as possible we have a sort of a Christmas tree approach, which is that we can start narrow and we can have a real deep focus on jazz dance, for example. But at different times in the talent development process, we need to spread that out and then try
Hmm.
gymnastics or try football or try playing a musical instrument. But what we want to understand most of all is how people will better their developmental skills so that they've not only just developed their motor skills to be one narrow thing. So, through that diversification, we're giving the body a chance to develop diverse motor skills. We're also giving the mind an opportunity to understand what other skills and what other capabilities that young person has.
Yeah. Is it then diversity within dance, or is it more like you say, trying different sports as well, or is it maybe a combination of these things?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So it can be a diversity within dance, but it would
Hmm.
be better, especially if the dance styles are all very similar. So maybe ballet, contemporary, and tap, for example. Those are all still very similar motor pathways. So how can
Hmm.
we do hand-eye coordination? How can we do weight bearing on the hands? How can we do maybe contact? How do we integrate those different fundamental motor skills into a young person's life?
Yeah, yeah. The book also talks about talent development, and there it's also discussed what the difference is between talent and success and how it's positioned towards each other. Can you say something more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with dancers, talent can be seen as the same as success. And I think in many cases, when we are talking about talent development, we can talk about the success that is coming from other people's recognition.
Hmm.
But actually, coming back to that idea of our intrinsic motives and what we believe, we want to make sure that talent is seen as one piece of the puzzle. So
Hmm.
if I am a very skilled dancer in whatever genre I choose, that isn't automatically going to make me successful. There are
Yeah.
other things that will impact that. What kinds of teachers I have, what kinds of experiences I have,
Hmm.
chance opportunities to do things or to try things out. And so when we interpret success, we need to have an internal idea of what success means to us. Does success mean that we're going to be the most competitive dancer? Does success mean that we want to enjoy what we're doing? And my research in dance has indicated that most dancers have a dualistic definition of success, which
Hmm.
is that they believe they want to be a highly skilled dancer, but they also want to be happy and healthy and doing something that they enjoy. And that's really interesting because most people would think, oh, well, if they're not the best dancer, then they're not successful. But actually, most of these highly successful dancers really have that dualistic idea.
Yeah. So both as in, yeah, again, you should be happy what you're doing and enjoying what you're doing before you actually get the dream dance job in the best company in the world as well. Yeah, the question why I wanted to touch upon like talent versus success is also that often you hear, whether it's about dance or sports, that this a person achieves something and then it's this generational talent, or they were talented for from the beginning. I think it leaves often out that the talent was probably thing that sparked it, but at the end, if you have a career of 15, 20 years, whether it's in dance or another sport, that it's the hard work that often get neglected, as in the sense of they have talent, so they just achieved it because of the talent, like ignoring the fact that they train 6 days a week, multiple trainings a day. It's like talent, you either have it or not. I mean, some people are just born naturally with maybe having high jumps or not. But if you don't show up for training, these jumps won't get you the probably your dream job in wherever career you want to pursue. There's also something that you mentioned already in psychology, that people who don't understand dance don't always understand, even if they understand performance psychology, don't always understand who dancers think. And that also led to something like dark side characteristics that were defined. Can you maybe explain what they are and give some examples?
Yeah. So when we talk about psychological skills, often that's seen as being something that's always positive.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of psychological characteristics or skills that can be really positive in some contexts, can be really negative in some contexts. And so a perfect example of this is perfectionism. So, if you have very high standards and you believe that in order to be satisfied with yourself, you have to deliver a flawless performance, that is pretty common, I'd say, and something that most people can maybe understand in different parts of their lives. So, if I am highly perfectionistic, what that often sort of makes me do or drives behavior to practice a lot, to train really hard, and also to be very focused on outcomes. So, perfectionism can actually have some really positive benefits for people in dance because it can help people to train more and to kind of focus on their training outcomes. It can also be taken in such a way that you can only be satisfied with that really perfect performance, and that definition is subjective. So if you're not
Hmm.
happy with the performance, you will never be happy. And people can also use that desire for perfection to drive behaviors which are harmful to them. So,
Hmm.
over practicing or being very rigid about the standards that they will be willing to accept, or tearing themselves down psychologically, ruminating about what went wrong in performances or what could go wrong in the future, which can really take them out of good training, can take them out of feeling good about themselves, and can also potentially cause them injury because they're overtraining and putting their body through too much. So that's a perfect example of a dual effect characteristic, which is that if you choose to use perfectionism positively and you're able to balance that with a sense of good self-worth and sort of realistic performance evaluation, if you don't do those things, it can really drive you to really negative experiences.
Hmm. And all these different things that you mentioned, is that something that you teach to others who apply it, or is it something that you as well personally talk with to dancers, or how should we see that for you personally then?
Yeah. So for me personally, I certainly have learned a lot through the process of this research and through writing the
Hmm.
book. But for me, I think dual effect characteristics are really a, a personal kind of struggle. So that perfectionism piece is really a big deal. But also, I think when you think about commitment and focus, I'm very committed. I'm extremely focused, but I can be over focused and I can lose track of everything else that's going on. So I'll be so focused on my work that I'll forget about, my relationships, or taking a break, or my
Hmm.
rest. And trying to make those balances is extremely important. And I think you can easily kind of take it the wrong way. So that's for me personally. But in terms of my teaching, I always really talk to people about those dual characteristics, because fundamentally, if you understand that you've got a characteristic that can be good if you use it well, or can be really negative if you choose to allow it to be, you
Hmm.
can better prepare yourself to manage those things. And we often see people who have been identified as talented because they have these dual characteristics. But what we don't see is that their talent development environment, or their teachers, their coaches, don't understand how negative those characteristics can be, and they
Yeah.
don't help them to manage them.
Yeah. So it's also both, maybe especially looking at the younger generation, that the coaches and teachers and parents look out for these things as well. And okay, I mean, for some teachers, it's just they teach their single class and don't have a big overview of what the dancer is doing besides the class. But maybe that's something for dancers or coaches who teach a team that they see regularly a week, especially the parents who see their children every day, to like be aware of. So I think that's also the good one of the good things about the book, is that you can use these things from different angles, whether you're a dancer yourself, whether you're experienced or just starting, and whether you're a parent or a coach or a teacher or a manager of dancers, that it gives you like the tools to work with these things. And actually, for dancers who read the book or just heard you talk, what are one of the first steps that they can actually do if they want to apply this to themselves? What are the first things that you would suggest? Okay, have a look at that. You don't have to do a million things from tomorrow on, but what are maybe the first things that they can do if they really want to give more attention to these different things as well, both dark side characteristics, but also the things that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. So the very first step is self reflection. And I think that that can be
Hmm.
hard for people if that's not a normal part of your practice. But it can be as simple as, after you finish dance class, just taking 5 minutes, making some notes on your phone or in a journal about what you experienced.
Hmm.
Maybe you had a really great experience that day or in that training session. Maybe it was really hard. And just making that a usual practice, that's the place to start. And then, as you notice things coming up, whether they're great things or challenging things, thinking about what that means for your experience. So that's where
Hmm.
we come into starting to think about applying psychological skills. So I am having this challenge. If I apply this psychological skill to it, for example, commitment, I can't do that step. I'm just never going to be able to get it. It's so frustrating. How can I apply commitment to that? And what is
Hmm.
commitment? So, okay, I've recognized there's a challenge here. I'm going to try to be more committed to practicing that step. I'm going to do it twice each training session and really think about it. I'm going to have a conversation with my coach about how I can do it better,
Hmm.
and what things might be challenging or going wrong. I'm going to speak to my peers, and I'm going to try that for 6 weeks. So you're
Hmm.
applying a specific skill to a specific problem. And I think there's a lot that you can do at that beginning stage to apply skills to individual problems that you identify. And then going back to that first step of reflection, how's this going? Is it being effective? Am I getting something out of this commitment thing that I'm doing? If not, try something else. I'm a big believer in scientific process. If you try it, it doesn't work, throw it away and try something else.
Hmm.
The other piece of the puzzle there is where you get your information. So, when you think about how you're going to take next steps in your physical training, your psychological training, your dance training as a whole, you need to select information and resources which are specific and valuable and well informed. So don't just kind of find an Instagram handle that seems to talk about these things. really investigate who that person is. Do they have expertise in this area? Do they understand what you're doing? So I'd say between those sort of things, those reflection things, the trying things out and choosing information, which is expert led.
Yeah, that's indeed great advice. Before we wrap up, for you personally, what are your future plans? I've also read that you're pursuing a PhD. Can you maybe tell something about that more, or what do you have in the near future planned for these different things, or maybe a next book or something?
Yeah, so I am pursuing a PhD. I'm looking into talent development processes and psychological skills, unsurprisingly. So I'm doing lots of interviews with dancers about how they're experiencing their training. The other thing that I'm really passionate about doing is that I think lots of people who are in dance, whether they're professional dancers or teachers or choreographers, I think there are a lot of mental health challenges that those people experience, and whether they're to do with the dance part of their lives or whether they're to do with something else in their lives which affects their dancing. I'm very passionate about helping people to find support. And there are some brilliant, incredible people that I work with. So I'm working with Dr. Lucy Clements and also with Kathleen McGuire Gaines. Dr. Lucy Clements is on Instagram as the dance psychologist, and Kathleen McGuire Gaines runs something called Minding the Gap, which is a social good organization which supports dancers' mental health. And I couldn't be more passionate about helping dancers to have positive experiences, because I think, as I said at the beginning, we're lucky enough in dance to be able to do something which hopefully gives us joy, love, passion, excitement, fulfillment. And it's not okay for people not to experience those things that are intrinsic to the art form. So I want to try and help people as much as I can to do that. So those are my two kind of big work-life goals there.
Yeah, that's super great to hear about. Before we say goodbye, how can people get in touch with you if they have questions, maybe want to learn more about the book or the workshops or the educations that you're doing? How can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in learning more about the book and the concepts that are within it, it's best to get in touch with Gray Matters. So gray, like the color gray. That is the organization that Professor Dave Collins and Dr. Onion McNamara work with, and they provide educational workshops for organizations and individuals. If you want to get in touch with me specifically and talk about all things dance and about dancers' kind of psychological skill development, I would love to be in touch. You can reach out to me on Instagram. My handle is Erin_Sanchez. Excuse me, it's Erin Sanchez, spelled EIRINN. If you can put that in the performance notes, I'm sure nobody will have been able to understand me saying that. I also am available on email. You can find my email address on One.uk's website.
Yeah, okay. I will also include it, like you say, the show notes so people can just click on it. And thanks a lot for the talk, for answering my questions, for talking about the book. So for the people listening, I can highly recommend it as well. It gives like a lot of things that you can try yourself, and if you're a dancer, a lot of things that you will notice that have been happening or happening around you, and that can help your career, whether you're dancing for fun or if you want to join a specific company or performance in the future. So Erin, thanks. Hope to talk to you soon in the future again. Bye.
Indeed, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
If you want to know more about podcast, you can find us on social media. We are at DAAT Podcast. DAAT stands for Dancers or Athletes Too. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also check out our website at daatpodcast.com. I'm also on social media. Surprise, surprise. You can find me at This Is Slim B. Thanks for listening, and I hope you tune in again for our next episode. Take care. Kobo out.